Hi, Gerry from BereaNation.com. This morning in my devotions, I was reading in Acts chapter 20, and in verse 7, there's a window on life in the early church. And what it says, on the first day of the week, when we were gathered together to break bread. So, I recognize the idea of taking a snippet of text and using it to build a theology on. That's called proof texting, but that's not what this is. This is a window into things and practices of the early church. They're mentioned in passing, but we can infer some truth from it. The first thing we see here is that they gathered. So it was more than one person. It wasn't the old, I can pray by myself while I'm watching football or on the car radio with the tunes blaring, driving down the highway. They gathered at a specific location that was agreed on ahead of time. Maybe it was rented. I'm betting it was consistent, although it doesn't say in this passage. And they gathered specifically to break bread. That is, they gathered to celebrate with the symbols, those things that Jesus used at the Last Supper, the bread and the cup. And it's also described by Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, starting in verse 23. They did this together, and they did it on the first day of the week. This is important because it is not the Sabbath. Why is that important? Well, you think about this. The Sabbath day was holy to the Jews, and yet Christianity chose to ignore the Sabbath and the bit of the commandment that said, remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. Now, well, ignore is the wrong word, but disregard in a spiritual sense, and they chose instead to meet on the first day of the week. The day that Jesus rose from the dead, in fact. And, when he rose from the grave, he actually started something new. It's not that the Sabbath was ignored, but with the resurrection of Jesus, we are no longer under the law and no longer required to keep those kinds of traditions. If you're going to be with us into our study in Hebrews later on, you're going to learn that there is in fact a Sabbath rest for the people of God. And it's to be celebrated every day. So, with all of that in mind, they gathered at a specific time, at a specific location, with brethren of like mind, and they gathered to break bread, that is, to worship God in response to who he was, who he is, and what he has done. This is how we should be. On the first day of the week, we should gather with brothers and sisters of like mind to celebrate with the symbols, the bread and the cup. And when we do those things, we are being reverential like those Bereans so long ago. I'm Gerry Brinkman. You're on BereaNation.com. Study the scriptures daily to see if these things are so.